The text message hit me like a physical blow. Mom, I've thought about this long and hard, and I don't want you at my baby shower this Saturday. Please respect my decision. I stared at my phone screen in the parking lot of Mountain View Cafe, my hands trembling as I read Amanda's words over and over again. 28 years of being her mother, and she was banning me from celebrating her first pregnancy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Colorado spring air felt suddenly cold as I sat in my car, trying to process what had just happened. Amanda Parker-Torres, my only daughter, the little girl I'd raised alone after her father walked out when she was 3, had just uninvited me from one of the most important days of her life. The baby shower I'd been looking forward to for months, the one where I'd planned to announce that I was setting up a college fund for my future grandchild. I pulled up Amanda's contact photo on my phone, a picture from her wedding day 2 years ago where she looked radiant in her grandmother's vintage dress. Her smile had been so bright that day, and when she'd hugged me after the ceremony, she'd whispered, "Thank you for everything, Mom. I couldn't have done any of this without you." Now, apparently, she could do everything without me, including celebrate her pregnancy. The irony wasn't lost on me. For the past 18 months, I'd been quietly ensuring that Amanda and her husband Carlos could afford their comfortable life in Riverside, Colorado. Not through direct handouts, which I knew Amanda's pride would never accept, but through something far more substantial. Every month, $2,500 from my consulting business went directly to Summit Healthcare Solutions, the medical facility where Carlos worked as a physician's assistant. What Amanda didn't know was that Carlos's position there existed solely because I'd been subsidizing his salary. I'd discovered Carlos was struggling to find stable work shortly after their wedding. The healthcare job market in smaller Colorado towns was competitive, and despite his qualifications, he'd been bouncing between temporary positions that barely paid enough to cover their modest apartment rent. Amanda had confided in me during one of our weekly coffee dates that they were worried about starting a family because of their financial instability. She'd looked so stressed, so different from the confident young woman who'd graduated from Colorado State with honors in marketing. That's when I'd approached Dr. Harrison at Summit Healthcare Solutions. We'd worked together on several healthcare consulting projects, and I knew he'd been wanting to expand his staff but couldn't justify the expense. I'd proposed a partnership arrangement. My consulting firm would sponsor a physician's assistant position for 18 months, giving Carlos stable employment while providing Dr. Harrison with the additional staff he needed. It was presented as a community health initiative, something that would look good for both our businesses. Carlos had no idea. As far as he knew, he'd simply been the successful candidate for a competitive position. Amanda had been so proud when he'd gotten the job, calling me immediately to share the good news. "Mom, you won't believe it. Carlos got offered a full-time position at Summit Healthcare. We can finally start planning for our future." Her excitement had made every dollar I'd spent worth it. But now, sitting in this parking lot with her rejection text burning on my phone screen, I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. Somewhere along the way, Amanda had grown distant. Our weekly coffee dates had become sporadic. She'd stopped sharing details about her life, her marriage, her hopes for motherhood. When I'd asked about the baby shower plans a month ago, she'd been vague, saying they were keeping it small and intimate. I thought back to the last real conversation we'd had, 3 weeks ago at Mountain View Cafe. I'd been excited to tell her about a new client my consulting firm had landed, a major project that would allow me to expand my community health initiatives. But Amanda had seemed distracted, barely responding to my news. When I'd asked about her pregnancy, she'd given short answers, not the enthusiastic updates I'd expected from someone carrying their first child. "How are you feeling? Any morning sickness?" I'd asked, reaching across the table to touch her hand. She'd pulled away slightly, a gesture so subtle I'd almost missed it. "I'm fine, Mom. Everything's fine." And Carlos, Is he excited about becoming a father? Of course he is, she'd replied, but something in her tone had seemed off. We're both very happy. Now I realized that conversation had been full of warning signs I'd ignored. Amanda's distance, her reluctance to share details, the way she'd seemed almost guarded around me. I'd attributed it to pregnancy hormones or the natural transition into adulthood, but clearly, something deeper was wrong. I started my car and drove the familiar route to my office at Parker & Associates Consulting, the business I'd built from nothing after Amanda's father left us. The mountain views that usually calmed me felt oppressive today, reminding me of how isolated I suddenly felt. My assistant, Patricia Stone, looked up with concern as I walked through the door. Linda, you look upset. Is everything all right? Patricia had been with me for 5 years, long enough to know that I rarely let personal matters affect my professional demeanor. She'd watched me build this business while raising Amanda as a single mother, celebrating every milestone with genuine care. She'd been thrilled when I'd told her about the pregnancy and had even offered to help coordinate a small celebration at the office. Amanda uninvited me from her baby shower, I said, the words feeling surreal as I spoke them aloud. Patricia's face fell. What? But you've been so excited about it. You even had me order those special gifts from Denver. The gifts? I'd forgotten about the personalized baby blanket embroidered with "From Grandma Linda with Love" and the collection of children's books I'd carefully selected, including the same ones I'd read to Amanda when she was little. They were wrapped and ready, sitting in my office closet like monuments to my naive expectations. She said she'd thought about it long and hard, I continued, sinking into my desk chair. That tells me this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. She's been planning to exclude me. Patricia sat down across from my desk, her expression troubled. Did she give you any reason? You two have always been so close. That was the question that had been gnawing at me since receiving the text. Amanda and I had our disagreements over the years, especially during her teenage phase when she'd resented my strict rules and high expectations. But we'd worked through those conflicts. When she'd started college, our relationship had evolved into something I'd treasured, a friendship built on mutual respect and genuine affection. I have no idea, I admitted. And that's what hurts the most. I thought we could talk about anything. Patricia was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. Linda, you know I don't like to pry, but I've noticed you've been working extra hours lately. All those late nights on the Summit Healthcare account? Could Amanda be feeling neglected? The suggestion stung because it held a grain of truth. The past few months had been busy, with new clients and the ongoing arrangement with Dr. Harrison requiring careful management. But everything I'd been doing was ultimately for Amanda's benefit, to ensure she and Carlos had financial stability as they started their family. I've been working hard, yes, but not any more than usual, and certainly not enough to warrant being banned from my daughter's baby shower. As I said the words, I realized how much they revealed about my state of mind. I was looking for logical explanations, rational reasons why Amanda might have made this decision. But family relationships weren't always logical, and perhaps I'd been so focused on providing for Amanda's future that I'd missed something important in her present. My phone buzzed with a text from Diane Hoffman, my best friend since college. Heard from Amanda lately? She's been radio silent in our group chat for weeks. Diane had been like an aunt to Amanda growing up, someone who provided perspective when I was too close to situations to see them clearly. I called Diane immediately, needing to talk to someone who knew both Amanda and me well enough to offer insights I might be missing. Linda? What's wrong? Diane answered on the first ring, her years of friendship allowing her to read my mood. Instantly. Amanda uninvited me from her baby shower, I said without preamble. She what? Diane's shock was genuine and somehow comforting. If she was surprised, then maybe I wasn't crazy to feel blindsided by this decision. I got a text 1 hour ago. Very formal, very final. She said she'd thought about it long and hard and didn't want me there. Diane was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Linda, I need to tell you something. Amanda called me last week, asking questions about your business. Specifically, she wanted to know about your healthcare consulting work. My stomach dropped. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What kind of questions? She seemed particularly interested in your relationship with Summit Healthcare Solutions. She kept asking about the nature of your contract with them, whether it was unusual for consulting firms to sponsor specific positions. The pieces were starting to come together, and I didn't like the picture they were forming. Did she seem suspicious? More than suspicious, Diane admitted reluctantly. She seemed angry. She asked me if I thought it was ethical for someone to secretly pay for their son-in-law's job without telling him or her daughter. The world seemed to tilt around me. Amanda knew. Somehow she'd discovered my arrangement with Dr. Harrison, and instead of seeing it as the loving gesture I'd intended, she viewed it as some kind of betrayal. Diane, I was trying to help them. Carlos couldn't find stable work, and Amanda was so stressed about their finances. I thought if I could quietly ensure he had a good job, they could focus on building their life together without worrying about money. I know your intentions were good, Diane said gently. But Linda, think about how this looks from Amanda's perspective. She's been proud of Carlos's achievements, telling everyone how hard he worked to get that position. Now she finds out it wasn't really his accomplishment at all. The truth of Diane's words hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on solving Amanda's financial problems that I'd never considered how my secret intervention might affect her sense of independence and pride. Amanda had always been fiercely self-reliant, a trait I'd encouraged and admired. To her, my well-intentioned help probably felt like manipulation. How did she find out? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. She didn't say exactly, but she mentioned something about Carlos mentioning that Dr. Harrison had made some comment about how grateful he was for the community partnership that made his position possible. Carlos started asking questions and, apparently, the story didn't add up. I closed my eyes, imagining the conversation Amanda and Carlos must have had. The confusion, the questions, the gradual realization that their financial stability was built on a foundation they'd never known existed. Carlos was a proud man from a traditional family that valued hard work and self-sufficiency. Learning that his job was essentially charity from his mother-in-law would have been devastating. Is there more? I asked, sensing Diane was holding something back. Amanda also asked me if I thought you'd been checking up on them in other ways. She seemed to think there might be a pattern of interference she'd never noticed before. This was getting worse by the minute. I tried to think of other times I might have quietly helped Amanda without her knowledge, and unfortunately, several instances came to mind. The time I'd called in a favor to get her an interview at her current marketing job. The occasion when I'd anonymously paid for her car repairs when she was a struggling college student. The wedding expenses I'd covered without telling her, letting her believe the vendors had given her unexpected discounts. At the time, each of these actions had felt like natural expressions of maternal love. I had the resources to help, and I wanted to see Amanda succeed without the financial stress that had defined so much of my own young adulthood. But viewed as a pattern, I could see how they might appear controlling or manipulative. Diane, what should I do? I can't just leave things like this. She's having my first grandchild. You need to talk to her, Diane said firmly. Not text, not email. A real conversation where you can explain your motivations and listen to her concerns. But Linda, you need to be prepared for the possibility that she might need some time to process all of this. After hanging up with Diane, I sat in my office staring out at the Colorado mountains, trying to figure out how 18 months of what I'd considered generous support had led to this moment of complete estrangement from My daughter. The baby shower was in 3 days. Amanda would be surrounded by friends and family, celebrating the new life she was bringing into the world, and I would be absent from that joy because of my own misguided attempts to help. Patricia knocked on my door, bringing me back to the present moment. Linda, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Dr. Harrison from Summit Healthcare is online too. He says it's urgent. With a sinking feeling, I picked up the phone. Dr. Harrison, what can I do for you? Linda, I'm afraid we have a situation. Parker-Torres submitted his resignation this morning, effective immediately. He seemed quite upset and mentioned something about not being able to continue in a position that wasn't legitimately his. I'm confused because his work has been excellent, and I thought he was happy here. The last piece of the puzzle fell into place. Not only had Amanda discovered my financial arrangement, but Carlos had quit his job rather than continue accepting what he now viewed as charity. Their stable income, the foundation I'd tried to provide for their growing family, was gone. Dr. Harrison, I think there's been some miscommunication. Can we schedule a meeting to discuss this situation? Of course, but Linda, I need to know if our partnership arrangement is still valid. I've been counting on that funding to maintain the position, and if Carlos is leaving anyway. Let me get back to you on that, I said, my mind racing through the implications. I may need to restructure our agreement. After ending the call, I realized the full scope of the damage my secret had caused. Not only was my relationship with Amanda in crisis, but Carlos had sacrificed his job rather than accept help he hadn't known he was receiving. Their financial situation, which I'd been trying to stabilize, was now worse than when I'd started. The baby shower was happening whether I was there or not, but the family I'd been trying to support was falling apart because of my actions. I needed to find a way to fix this, not just for my own relationship with Amanda, but for the sake of my future grandchild who deserved to grow up in a family that wasn't torn apart by misunderstandings and wounded pride. Looking at the gifts, still sitting in my office closet, I made a decision. I would go to Amanda directly, not to the baby shower she'd banned me from, but to her home where we could have the honest conversation that was long overdue. It was time to stop trying to help from the shadows and start dealing with the consequences of my well-intentioned interference. The drive to Amanda's apartment would take 20 minutes. 20 minutes to figure out how to explain 18 months of secret financial support and a lifetime of quiet interventions that I'd never realized might feel like violations of her independence. 20 minutes to prepare for a conversation that might determine whether I'd be part of my grandchild's life or remain an unwelcome presence my daughter felt she needed to protect her family from. As I gathered my keys and headed for the door, Patricia called after me. Linda, do you want me to reschedule your afternoon appointments? Yes, I replied without hesitation. This might take a while. The drive to Lakeside Apartments felt longer than usual, my mind churning through different approaches to the conversation I was about to have with Amanda. The complex where she and Carlos lived was modest but well-maintained, a place for young professionals starting their lives together. I'd helped them secure the lease 2 years ago, though now I wondered if Amanda knew about that intervention, too. I parked outside Building C and sat for a moment, gathering my courage. Through their second-floor window, I could see movement inside their apartment. Carlos's truck was in the parking lot, which meant he was home from what was apparently his last day at Summit Healthcare. The weight of what my secret had cost him pressed heavily on my chest. The climb up the exterior stairs felt like ascending toward judgment. I knocked softly on their door, hearing voices inside go quiet. Footsteps approached, and I recognized Carlos's hesitant tone asking, "Who is it?" "It's Linda," I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to speak with both of you." The door opened to reveal Parker-Torres, a man I'd grown genuinely fond of over the past 2 years. He was tall and lean, with kind eyes that reflected both intelligence and integrity. Today, those eyes held confusion, and something that looked like betrayal. He stepped back to let me in, but his posture remained guarded. "Mrs. Parker," he said formally, using the title he'd adopted since learning about my business arrangement. Before this crisis, he'd always called me Linda, and we'd developed an easy rapport built on mutual respect for Amanda's happiness. Amanda appeared from the kitchen, her pregnancy showing beautifully at 6 months. She wore a loose sweater that couldn't hide her obvious distress, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy from crying. The sight of her pain cut through me more sharply than any angry words could have. "Mom, I told you I needed space," she said, wrapping her arms protectively around her growing belly. "Why are you here?" "Because I love you," I replied simply. "And because I think there are things that need to be said that can't be communicated through text messages." Carlos gestured toward their small living room, and we all sat down in what felt like a formal arrangement rather than a family gathering. The coffee table between us held wedding photos and ultrasound images, reminders of happier times when we'd all believed in the future we were building together. "I know you've discovered my arrangement with Dr. Harrison," I began, deciding that directness was the only path forward. "And I can see from both of your reactions that my attempts to help have caused more harm than good." Amanda's composure cracked slightly. "Attempts to help?" she repeated, her voice rising. "Mom, do you have any idea what you've done?" Carlos has been proud of that job, telling his family how he'd finally found his place in Riverside's medical community. Now he finds out it was all fake. "It wasn't fake," I protested. "Carlos earned that position. Dr. Harrison has told me repeatedly how valuable he's been to the practice. The only thing I provided was the funding that made the position possible." Carlos spoke for the first time since letting me in. "Mrs. Parker, with respect, that's exactly the problem. I've been telling everyone, including my parents back in Texas, how I'd successfully established myself in my career. My father was so proud when I called to tell him about the job at Summit Healthcare. He said it reminded him of when he first became a foreman at the construction company, earning respect through hard work." The pain in his voice was evident, and I began to understand the cultural dimension of what my interference had cost him. Carlos came from a family that valued self-reliance and earned success. To discover that his professional achievement was essentially subsidized charity undermined not just his pride, but his standing within his own family. "Carlos, your work speaks for itself," I said earnestly. "Dr. Harrison has mentioned multiple times how patients specifically request to see you, how you've improved the efficiency of the practice. That's not something money can buy." "But the opportunity was bought," Amanda interjected sharply. "Don't you see, Mom? You've been manipulating our lives without our knowledge or consent. How many other things have you secretly arranged for us?" The question I'd been dreading hung in the air between us. I could lie, minimize the extent of my interventions, but the moment called for complete honesty, regardless of the consequences. "There have been other instances," I admitted quietly. "The interview that led to your marketing job, Amanda. I knew someone at the company and mentioned your qualifications. Your car repairs during college when you thought you'd received an anonymous Good Samaritan payment. Some of your wedding expenses that you believed were vendor discounts." Amanda's face went white, then flushed with anger. "My job? Mom, I thought I'd earned that position based on my portfolio and interview skills. I've been telling people for 3 years how proud I was to have landed it on my own merit." "You did earn it," I insisted. "I simply made sure your resume got proper consideration. Everything after that was your achievement." "That's not the point." Amanda stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "You've been pulling strings behind our backs for years, letting us believe we were succeeding independently, when we were actually living in some kind of elaborate puppet show you were directing." Carlos remained seated, but his jaw was tight with suppressed emotion. "Mrs. Parker, I need you to understand something. When I married Amanda, I promised her father, your ex-husband, that I would provide for her and any children we might have. That promise meant everything to me. Learning that I've been failing at that promise, that you've been the one actually supporting us, it's devastating. This revelation surprised me. I knew Carlos had maintained a relationship with Amanda's father despite their divorce, but I hadn't realized he'd made such a formal commitment. The traditional values that made him such a devoted husband to Amanda also made my financial assistance feel like a public declaration of his inadequacy. You haven't been failing, I said firmly. The job market in healthcare has been challenging everywhere, not just in Riverside. What I did was create an opportunity for you to demonstrate your abilities. An opportunity built on deception, Amanda said, returning to sit beside Carlos. Mom, how can you not see how wrong this is? We're supposed to be partners, adults making our own decisions and facing our own challenges. Instead, you've been treating us like children who need to be secretly managed. The accusation stung because it contained more truth than I wanted to acknowledge. Looking back at my pattern of intervention, I could see how it might appear controlling rather than supportive. But my motivations had always been love and a desire to smooth the path for the daughter I'd raised alone. After your father left, I said, choosing my words carefully, I swore that you would never experience the kind of financial insecurity and uncertainty that defined our lives for so many years. Everything I've done has been to ensure you had opportunities and stability. But I never asked for that protection, Amanda replied, her voice breaking slightly. I needed to know I could succeed on my own, that I was capable of building a life without someone else arranging things for me. Every achievement I thought was mine, every obstacle I believed I'd overcome, now I have to question whether it was real or just another one of your interventions. The devastation in her voice made me realize the full extent of the damage I'd caused. By trying to protect Amanda from struggle, I'd robbed her of the confidence that comes from overcoming genuine challenges. My love had become a form of control that undermined the very independence I'd tried to teach her as a child. Carlos reached for Amanda's hand, offering comfort despite his own emotional turmoil. We need to figure out how to move forward from here, he said practically. I've resigned from Summit Healthcare, which means we need to reassess our financial situation, especially with the baby coming. You don't have to resign, I said quickly. Dr. Harrison values your work. We could restructure the arrangement, make it more transparent, or find another way to maintain your position. No, Carlos said firmly. I can't continue working there knowing the circumstances. It would compromise my professional integrity and my marriage. I'll find another position, one that I earn legitimately. Amanda squeezed his hand supportively, and I felt a pang of exclusion from their united front. They were facing this crisis together, while I remained the outsider who had created it. What about the baby shower? I asked quietly, the question that had brought me here initially seeming less important now, but still weighing on my heart. Amanda's expression hardened. I can't have you there, Mom. I need to celebrate this pregnancy with people who respect my autonomy and my marriage. Right now, I don't trust that you won't try to orchestrate something else, some other surprise that you think is helping but actually undermines our independence. The finality in her voice told me that this decision wasn't negotiable. I was being excluded not out of spite, but out of Amanda's need to protect the authentic relationships in her life from what she now saw as my manipulative influence. I understand, I said, though the words felt like they were tearing something inside my chest. But Amanda, I need you to know that everything I've done has come from a place of love. I may have made terrible mistakes in how I express that love, but my desire has always been your happiness. I know you love me, she replied, tears beginning to flow. But love without respect isn't enough, Mom. You've been making decisions about our lives without including us in those decisions. That's not love. That's control. The parallel to her father's abandonment wasn't lost on me. He'd left because he couldn't handle the responsibility of family life. I'd stayed but had perhaps been equally destructive by taking too much responsibility, trying to control outcomes rather than trusting Amanda to navigate her own path. Carlos stood up, signaling that our conversation was reaching its end. "Mrs. Parker, I appreciate that you wanted to help us, but we need to ask that you step back and let us handle our own affairs going forward. No more interventions, no more secret arrangements. If we need help, we'll ask for it directly. And if I want to be part of this family, part of my grandchild's life," Amanda added, her voice steadying with resolve, "I need to know that you respect our decisions and our independence. That means no more puppet strings, no more arrangements we don't know about." I nodded, understanding that this was my daughter setting boundaries that I'd apparently crossed repeatedly without realizing it. The baby shower exclusion was just the most visible consequence of a pattern of behavior that had slowly eroded their trust in me. "I'll respect your wishes," I promised, meaning it despite the pain it caused. "And I'll do whatever I need to do to earn back your trust, even if that means staying away until you're ready to include me again." As I stood to leave, I looked around their small apartment, seeing it now through different eyes. This wasn't a place that needed my improvement or assistance. It was their home, chosen and maintained through their own efforts, a symbol of the independence I'd been unconsciously undermining. "There's one more thing," Amanda said as I reached the door. "I've been wondering about other people in our lives, other relationships you might have influenced. I need to know if there are other secrets I should be aware of." The question opened another wound. Beyond the direct assistance I'd provided Amanda and Carlos, there were other instances where I'd used my business connections and resources to smooth paths for people I cared about. Diane's daughter had received a scholarship, recommendation from me. Patricia's son had gotten an internship through my professional network. Even some of Amanda's friends had benefited from introductions I'd made, though I'd never considered these actions problematic. "I've helped other people when I could," I admitted, "but never to the extent of what I arranged for you and Carlos, and never without believing it was in their best interest." "That's not your decision to make," Amanda said firmly. "People have the right to succeed or fail on their own merits, to face their challenges without unknown assistance. You've been playing God in people's lives, Mom, and that's not your role." The accuracy of her assessment was devastating. I had been playing God, convinced that my resources and connections obligated me to intervene in situations where I saw potential for improvement. But in doing so, I'd robbed people of authentic experiences and earned achievements. "I'll examine all of my relationships and business arrangements," I promised, "and I'll be transparent about any interventions that might affect people I care about." As I walked down the stairs from their apartment, I felt the weight of changes I needed to make extending far beyond my relationship with Amanda. My entire approach to helping others required reevaluation. The consulting business I'd built, partly to have resources for supporting Amanda, now needed to be restructured around principles of transparency and genuine partnership, rather than benevolent manipulation. The drive home took me past Golden Meadows Community Center, where Amanda's baby shower would take place in 2 days. I could see workers setting up for weekend events, and I imagined the joy and celebration that would fill that space while I remained absent from it. My exclusion was appropriate, but it didn't make the pain any less acute. At home, I sat in my study surrounded by photos of Amanda's childhood and achievement awards from my business success. All of it suddenly felt hollow, accomplishments built on a foundation of control rather than authentic relationships. My phone showed several missed calls from Diane, Patricia, and Dr. Harrison, all of whom were probably wondering about the crisis that had erupted around me. But before I returned any of those calls, I needed to do something more important. I pulled out a notebook and began making a list of every person I'd helped over the years, every intervention I'd made, every string I'd pulled. If I was going to earn back Amanda's trust and rebuild my relationships on honest foundations, I needed to understand the full scope of my well-intentioned manipulations. The list grew longer than I'd expected, revealing a pattern of behavior that extended back years before Amanda's marriage. I'd been operating from a belief that having resources meant having obligations to fix other people's problems, but I'd never considered whether they wanted their problems fixed or whether my fixes might create different problems entirely. As evening fell, I realized that Amanda's exclusion from the baby shower was actually a gift, though not one I would have chosen. It was forcing me to confront aspects of my character and relationships that I'd never examined honestly. The woman who had built a successful consulting business by solving other people's problems had become someone who solved problems that weren't hers to solve, in ways that undermined the very people she was trying to help. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations with Dr. Harrison, with my business partners, and with myself about how to restructure my professional and personal relationships around principles of transparency and respect. But tonight, I sat with the full realization of what my need to control outcomes had cost me and the people I loved most. The baby shower would happen without me, as it should. Amanda and Carlos would find their way forward without my secret assistance, as they deserved to. And I would begin the long process of learning how to love without controlling, how to help without manipulating, and how to be a mother and grandmother in ways that honored my daughter's independence rather than undermining it. The path back to being welcome in Amanda's life seemed impossibly long from where I sat that evening, but it was a journey I was finally ready to begin. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp Colorado sunshine that usually lifted my spirits, but today it felt like a spotlight illuminating my isolation. Somewhere across town, Amanda was preparing for her baby shower, surrounded by friends and family who would celebrate her pregnancy while I remained conspicuously absent. I'd woken before dawn, unable to sleep through the anticipation of a day that should have been joyful, but instead marked the depth of the rift I'd created with my daughter. My phone had been buzzing since yesterday with calls from relatives asking why I wasn't attending the shower. Aunt Stephanie, my younger sister, had called 3 times, confused about my absence from such a significant family event. I'd finally answered her 4th call, dreading the conversation but knowing she deserved some explanation. "Linda, what's going on?" Stephanie's voice carried the concern of someone who'd watched me raise Amanda alone and understood how central my daughter was to my life. "Amanda's cousin Jenny said you're not coming to the shower, but that can't be right. It's complicated." "Steph," I'd replied, not ready to explain the full scope of my mistakes to anyone, even my sister. "Amanda and I are working through some family issues right now." "Family issues serious enough to keep you away from celebrating your first grandchild?" Stephanie's tone shifted from concern to alarm. "Linda, whatever happened between you two, surely it can be set aside for something this important." The key assumption that I was the one choosing to stay away, rather than being explicitly uninvited, revealed how unthinkable my exclusion was to people who knew our relationship. For 28 years, I'd been the devoted single mother who'd sacrificed everything for Amanda's success and happiness. The idea that she would ban me from her baby shower seemed impossible to outside observers. "I wish it were that simple," I'd said, ending the call before Stephanie could press for more details. Now, sitting in my kitchen with untouched coffee, growing cold, I found myself imagining the celebration I was missing. Golden Meadows Community Center would be decorated in the soft pastels Amanda had chosen, probably with the cloud and rainbow theme she'd mentioned months ago, when she'd still been including me in her planning. Her friends from college would be there, along with colleagues from her marketing job and neighbors from Lakeside Apartments. Carlos's sister Maria had driven up from Denver with their mother Elena, who'd been so excited about becoming a grandmother. The guest list I wouldn't be part of included people I'd grown to care about over the years. Janet Wells, Amanda's former roommate who'd become like a second daughter to me, would probably be wondering about my absence. Helen Davies, a family friend who'd known Amanda since childhood, had specifically asked me about coordinating our gifts to avoid duplication. Now she'd be attending a shower where my absence would raise questions Amanda would have to field while trying to enjoy her celebration. I pulled out my laptop and opened the baby registry Amanda had created online, thinking perhaps I could still send something meaningful, even if I couldn't be there in person. The list revealed how carefully she and Carlos had chosen items for their first child. Practical necessities mixed with special touches that showed their excitement about becoming parents. A convertible crib that would grow with the baby, organic cotton clothing in gender-neutral colors, books about bilingual child-rearing that reflected Carlos's heritage. Looking at their carefully curated choices, I realized how my pattern of intervention had probably made Amanda question her own decision-making abilities. If she'd discovered that major aspects of her adult life had been secretly managed by me, how could she trust her instincts about parenthood or any other significant choices? My attempts to smooth her path had inadvertently undermined her confidence in her own judgment. The doorbell interrupted my brooding, and I opened it to find Diane Hoffman standing on my porch with a determined expression and 2 cups of coffee from Mountain View Cafe. "You look terrible," she announced, pushing past me into the house. "And before you tell me you're fine, I just drove past Golden Meadows and saw all the cars for Amanda's shower, which confirmed that you're really not there." Diane had been my closest friend since our college days at Colorado State, the person who'd supported me through my divorce, celebrated my business successes, and watched Amanda grow up. If anyone deserved the full truth about what had led to this crisis, it was her. "She banned me, Diane," I said, accepting the coffee she handed me. "Not because of a fight or a misunderstanding, but because she discovered I've been secretly controlling aspects of her life for years." Diane settled into my living room, the same space where she'd spent countless evenings over the decades, offering advice during Amanda's teenage rebellions and celebrating milestones like graduation and engagement. Her expression was serious, but not surprised, which told me she'd suspected more to this story than my initial phone call had revealed. "Tell me everything," she said simply. For the next hour, I laid out the complete scope of my interventions in Amanda's life, from the job interview I'd arranged to the car repairs I'd secretly paid for, culminating in the 18-month arrangement that had subsidized Carlos's salary. Diane listened without interruption, her expression growing more troubled as the full pattern emerged. "Linda," she said finally, "I've watched you be an incredible mother to Amanda, but what you're describing isn't mothering anymore. It's orchestrating her entire adult life." The bluntness of her assessment stung, but I couldn't argue with its accuracy. I thought I was protecting her from the kinds of struggles I faced as a young mother. After her father left, I promised. Myself, she'd never experienced that kind of uncertainty. "But uncertainty is part of growing up," Diane replied gently. "It's how people develop resilience and confidence in their ability to handle challenges. By removing all the obstacles, you've prevented Amanda from developing those skills." Her words echoed what Amanda herself had tried to tell me during our confrontation at the apartment. I'd been so focused on preventing my daughter from experiencing difficulty that I'd failed to consider how overcoming difficulty might be essential to her development as an independent adult. "The worst part," I continued, "is that Carlos quit his job rather than accept what he now sees as charity. Their financial situation is worse than when I started trying to help them." Diane frowned thoughtfully. "That's actually not the worst part, Linda. The worst part is that Amanda can't trust her own achievements anymore. Every success she thought she'd earned on her own merit is now questionable. That's a devastating thing to do to someone's sense of self." As if summoned by our conversation, my phone rang with a call from Janet Wells, Amanda's former roommate who I'd expected would be at the baby shower by now. "Mrs. Parker?" Janet's voice was tentative, unusual for someone who'd always been comfortable talking with me. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm confused about something." I'm at Amanda's shower, and she said you couldn't make it due to a family emergency, but I thought you should know that several people are asking questions. My heart sank. Amanda was covering for my absence, protecting me from embarrassment even after everything that had happened between us. The generosity of that gesture, when she had every right to let people know I'd been uninvited, revealed the kind of person I'd raised despite my recent mistakes. "What kind of questions?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. "Well, Aunt Stephanie arrived expecting to see you here, and when Amanda explained you had an emergency, she seemed confused because she'd spoken to you and you hadn't mentioned anything urgent. And Carlos's mother Elena keeps asking if there's anything she can do to help with whatever family crisis is keeping you away." The complications were multiplying. Amanda's attempt to spare me embarrassment was creating confusion among family members who knew how unlikely it was that I'd miss such an important event. Her cousins, who'd grown up seeing me as the devoted single mother who never missed significant moments, would find my absence completely out of character. "Janet, I appreciate you calling, but you should focus on celebrating with Amanda. The family situation will resolve itself. Mrs. Parker, I need to tell you something else. Amanda seems really stressed underneath all the shower excitement. She's doing a good job of hosting and being gracious, but those of us who know her well can tell something's wrong. Whatever happened between you two, maybe you could work it out after the shower. She needs you right now, even if she's not saying so." The call ended with Janet returning to the celebration, leaving me with an even heavier heart. My absence wasn't just affecting me. It was casting a shadow over Amanda's special day, despite her efforts to manage the situation gracefully. Diane had been listening to my side of the conversation, and her expression was thoughtful. "Linda, I think you need to go to that shower." "Absolutely not," I replied immediately. "Amanda specifically uninvited me. Showing up would be the exact kind of boundary violation that created this problem in the first place." "I'm not suggesting you crash the party," Diane clarified. "But you could go to the community center, stay outside, and be available if Amanda decides she wants to talk. Sometimes people need to know that someone cares enough to show up, even if they're not ready to reconcile." The suggestion felt risky, but it also felt right in a way that staying home wallowing in guilt did not. If Amanda truly didn't want to see me, I could respect that and leave. But if some part of her was hoping I'd find a way to bridge the gap between us, my absence would be another disappointment in a relationship that had already sustained too much damage. "What if it makes things worse?" I asked, voicing my deepest fear. "How could they be worse?" Diane countered. "You're already excluded from your daughter's life. At least this way, you're demonstrating that you care more about her happiness than your own comfort." An hour later, I found myself parked across the street from Golden Meadows Community Center, watching guests arrive with beautifully wrapped gifts and excited expressions. The parking lot was full of cars I recognized, family and friends who were part of Amanda's support network, people who would help her through the transition to motherhood that I was now excluded from. Through the community center's large windows, I could see glimpses of the celebration inside. Soft decorations in pale yellow and mint green created a cheerful atmosphere, and I caught sight of Amanda moving between groups of guests, her pregnancy making her glow with happiness despite whatever stress Janet had detected. She was wearing a flowing dress in a shade of blue that had always been flattering on her, and her hair was styled in the elegant updo she favored for special occasions. Carlos was there too, looking handsome in a button-down shirt and slacks, playing the role of proud, expectant father despite the career crisis my interference had created. I watched him shake hands with guests and accept congratulations, wondering how he was managing to appear celebratory when his professional life was in chaos. As I sat in my car, observing the happiness I was excluded from, I began to understand something important about the nature of my mistakes. This wasn't just about the secret financial arrangements or the hidden interventions in Amanda's career. It was about my fundamental inability to trust that the people I loved could handle their own lives successfully. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Stone, my assistant, who was supposed to be enjoying her weekend, but was clearly worried about me. Linda, I know you're going through a difficult time with Amanda, but I wanted you to know that Dr. Harrison called the office. He's concerned about Carlos's resignation and wants to discuss options for keeping him on staff. Maybe there's still a way to fix this situation. The message represented exactly the kind of intervention I'd been making for years, jumping in to solve problems that belonged to other people. My first instinct was to call Dr. Harrison immediately, to explain the situation and negotiate a solution that would restore Carlos's job. But doing so would repeat the exact pattern that had caused this crisis in the first place. Instead, I typed back to Patricia. Thank you for letting me know, but any decisions about Carlos's employment need to be made by Carlos himself. Please tell Dr. Harrison he should contact Carlos directly if he wants to discuss the position. Sending that message felt like stepping off a cliff, trusting that Carlos could handle his own professional relationships without my secret management. It was a small step toward the kind of respect for other people's autonomy that Amanda had demanded, but it felt monumental after years of automatic intervention. Movement in the community center caught my attention, and I saw Amanda step outside onto the small patio area, taking what appeared to be a brief break from hosting duties. She stood alone for a moment, one hand resting on her rounded belly, looking out toward the parking lot where I sat in my car. For a moment, our eyes met across the distance, and I saw a flicker of something in her expression that might have been longing or regret. But before I could interpret it fully, she turned and went back inside, leaving me with the question of whether she'd seen me there and what that recognition might mean. The afternoon stretched on with me maintaining my vigil from the parking lot, close enough to be available if needed, but far enough to respect the boundaries Amanda had established. I watched guests leave carrying pieces of cake and thank you hugs, saw Carlos loading gifts into their truck, observed the gradual wind-down of a celebration that had clearly been successful despite my absence. As the community center emptied, I faced a decision about whether to approach Amanda or simply drive away, having made my presence known without forcing a confrontation. The choice felt symbolic of the larger changes I needed to make in my approach to relationships, learning to offer support without demanding acceptance, to be available without being controlling. Janet Wells emerged from the building and spotted my car immediately, walking over with a direct purpose that reminded me why Amanda had always valued her friendship. Mrs. Parker, I thought that was your car. Amanda saw you out here about an hour ago. Did she say anything? I asked, rolling down my window. She said her mother was as stubborn as she was, but that stubbornness had always been one of your best qualities. Janet smiled slightly. I think that was her way of saying she appreciates that you're here, even if she's not ready to talk. Yet. The message felt like a small gift, acknowledgement that my presence hadn't gone unnoticed or unappreciated, even if it couldn't repair the damage between us immediately. How did the shower go? I asked, genuinely wanting to know that Amanda had been able to enjoy her celebration. It was beautiful. She got everything she needed for the baby, and everyone had a wonderful time sharing advice and stories. But Linda, I could tell she was thinking about you. Several times during the gift opening, she looked toward the door like she was hoping someone might still arrive. The bittersweet nature of that observation stayed with me as Janet returned to help with cleanup, and I finally started my car to drive home. Amanda had successfully hosted her baby shower, surrounded by people who loved and supported her, but my absence had been felt even as she'd managed to work around it. The drive home took me past familiar landmarks of our shared life in Riverside, the elementary school where I'd attended countless performances and parent conferences, the park where we'd spent weekend afternoons when she was small, the high school where I'd cheered at her graduation. All of these places held memories of a relationship that had been built on genuine love and mutual respect, even if it had later been complicated by my need to control outcomes. Back home, I found myself looking through photo albums from Amanda's childhood, searching for clues about when my protective instincts had shifted from appropriate parenting to problematic interference. The pictures showed a happy child who'd grown into a confident young woman, someone who'd succeeded in school, maintained friendships, and built a loving marriage despite the challenges of having a single mother and an absent father. Perhaps that success should have been evidence that Amanda was perfectly capable of handling adult challenges without my secret assistance. Instead, I'd interpreted her achievements as validation of my protective approach, never recognizing that she might be succeeding in spite of my interventions, rather than because of them. As evening fell, I realized that attending the baby shower from the parking lot had been both the right choice and an insufficient one. I'd demonstrated respect for Amanda's boundaries while still showing that I cared, but the gesture alone wouldn't rebuild the trust that my years of hidden manipulation had eroded. The real work of earning back my place in Amanda's life would require fundamental changes in how I approached relationships, not just with my daughter, but with everyone I cared about. It would mean learning to offer help only when asked, to trust other people's judgment even when I disagreed with their choices, and to accept that love sometimes meant stepping back rather than stepping in. The baby shower had happened without me, but it had also happened despite my absence, proving that Amanda was fully capable of creating joy and managing important events in her life. That realization was both painful and liberating, the beginning of my education in what it truly meant to respect the independence of the people I loved most. 3 weeks passed without a word from Amanda, and I threw myself into the painful process of dismantling the web of interventions I'd woven throughout the lives of people I cared about. Each phone call, each honest conversation, each admission of my behind-the-scenes manipulations felt like peeling back layers of my own skin, revealing the extent to which I'd built relationships on foundations of deception disguised as generosity. The first call had been to Dr. Harrison at Summit Healthcare Solutions. He'd been expecting to discuss Carlos's sudden resignation, but instead found himself listening to my confession about the true nature of our partnership arrangement. "I need to be completely transparent with you," I'd told him during our meeting at his office. The community health initiative that funded Carlos's position was essentially a fabrication I created to subsidize my son-in-law's salary without his knowledge. Dr. Harrison had listened with growing bewilderment as I explained how I'd manipulated the situation to appear legitimate while actually functioning as secret charity. His initial reaction had been professional disappointment, but as I'd continued talking, his expression had shifted to something approaching understanding. "Linda, I have to ask why you felt the need to be so elaborate in your deception. If you'd simply asked me to hire Carlos and offered to supplement his salary temporarily, I might have been willing to discuss that arrangement openly." The question had forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth about my methods. I hadn't pursued transparency because I'd known that both Carlos and Amanda would have rejected direct financial assistance. My elaborate subterfuge had been designed to bypass their autonomy and pride, giving me the outcome I wanted while denying them the choice to accept or refuse my help. "I was afraid they'd say no," I'd admitted, "and I thought I knew better than they did about what they needed." Dr. Harrison had been quiet for a long moment, processing this admission. "Carlos is a talented physician's assistant, Linda. His work here has been exemplary, and I've had several patients specifically request to continue seeing him. If he's interested in staying, I'd like to offer him the position legitimately at the salary we can actually afford without external funding." The offer had been both a relief and a test of my commitment to stepping back from manipulation. My first instinct had been to call Carlos immediately, to facilitate the conversation and ensure he understood the opportunity. Instead, I'd asked Dr. Harrison to reach out to Carlos directly, removing myself from any role in the negotiation. "I think it's important that this be between you and Carlos," I'd said. "Whatever decision he makes about his career needs to be his own, without any influence from me." Similar conversations had followed with other people whose lives I'd touched through my network of professional connections and financial resources. Each revelation had been humiliating in its own way, but also strangely liberating. The burden of maintaining so many secret arrangements and hidden interventions had been exhausting, though I'd never recognized it as such until I began dismantling them. Patricia Stone had been particularly shocked when I'd explained the full scope of my meddling in other people's affairs. She'd known about my consulting work with Summit Healthcare, but she'd had no idea about the personal motivations behind it or the broader pattern of interference it represented. "Linda, I've worked for you for 5 years, and I thought I knew you well," she'd said during one of our office conversations. "But what you're describing sounds like someone I don't recognize at all." Her reaction had been sobering because Patricia was right. The woman who'd built a successful consulting business through hard work and ethical practices had somehow evolved into someone who used that success to manipulate outcomes in other people's lives, all while convincing herself that she was being helpful rather than controlling. The most difficult call had been to Diane's daughter Sarah, now a college junior who'd received a scholarship recommendation from me 2 years earlier. Sarah had earned the scholarship through her academic achievements, but my letter of recommendation had carried weight because of my professional reputation and connections to the scholarship committee. "Mrs. Parker, I don't understand," Sarah had said when I'd called to explain the situation. "Are you saying I didn't deserve the scholarship?" "Not at all," I'd assured her quickly. "You absolutely deserved it based on your grades and activities. But I want you to know that my recommendation wasn't just based on your merit. I wrote it because I wanted to help your mother, and that might have influenced how I presented your qualifications." The conversation had been awkward and unnecessary from Sarah's perspective, but I'd felt compelled to clear the air about every instance where I'd used my influence in ways that might have affected other people's achievements. Sarah had ended, the call confused and somewhat hurt, wondering why I was diminishing her accomplishment by revealing the behind-the-scenes advocacy she'd never asked for. These conversations had taught me something important about the nature of confession and accountability. While I'd felt better after admitting my manipulations, my honesty had often caused pain or confusion for the people I'd been trying to help. The process of making amends wasn't as simple as telling the truth. It required careful consideration of whether my confessions were serving my need for absolution or genuinely helping the people I'd affected. During this period of painful self-examination, I'd heard through Diane that Amanda and Carlos were facing significant challenges. Without his stable income from Summit Healthcare, they were struggling to meet their monthly expenses, especially with baby preparations adding to their financial stress. Carlos had been interviewing for positions throughout the Denver metro area, but the job market remained competitive, and his sudden departure from Summit had raised questions among potential employers. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to intervene, to make phone calls, to leverage my connections to find Carlos employment, to offer direct financial assistance to help them through this difficult period. But Amanda's words echoed in my mind. "Love without respect isn't enough, Mom." Interfering now, even with the best intentions, would prove that I'd learned nothing from the crisis I'd created. Instead, I'd focused on making changes within my own business that reflected my new understanding of ethical boundaries. Parker & Associates Consulting had always operated with integrity in our client relationships, but I'd realized that some of our community partnership initiatives had been motivated by my personal agenda rather than genuine business objectives. I'd restructured several ongoing arrangements, ensuring that all partnerships were transparent and mutually beneficial, rather than vehicles for my private philanthropic impulses. The process had been financially costly, as some relationships had ended when their true nature was revealed, but it had also been professionally clarifying. The business that emerged from this reorganization was smaller but more authentic, built on honest relationships rather than elaborate arrangements designed to serve my need to control outcomes. Frank Morrison, my business partner for the past decade, had been both supportive and concerned as he'd watched me dismantle what he'd considered successful community engagement strategies. "Linda, I understand you're going through personal challenges with Amanda, but some of these partnerships have been beneficial for everyone involved," he'd argued during one of our planning meetings. "Just because your motivations were complicated doesn't mean the outcomes weren't positive." His perspective had forced me to grapple with the complex ethics of well-intentioned manipulation. Some of my interventions had indeed produced positive results for the people involved. Carlos had performed excellently at Summit Healthcare, serving patients effectively regardless of how he'd obtained the position. Several young people had succeeded in educational and professional opportunities that my networking had helped create. But the positive outcomes didn't justify the deceptive methods I'd used to achieve them. People had the right to know the true circumstances of their opportunities, to make informed decisions about accepting help, and to experience authentic achievement rather than success that was secretly orchestrated by someone else. The turning point in my period of isolation came through an unexpected source. Mark Chen, my attorney, had called to discuss some routine business matters, but the conversation had shifted when he'd mentioned seeing Amanda at a networking event for young professionals in the marketing field. "She seemed well, though I got the impression she's under some stress," he'd reported. "When I mentioned that I represent you, she asked me to give you a message." My heart had stopped. After weeks of silence, Amanda had reached out indirectly, using Mark as an intermediary rather than contacting me directly. The approach suggested she was still maintaining boundaries, while also indicating she had something she wanted me to know. "What was the message?" I'd asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "She said to tell you that she's been thinking about what you said during your last conversation, about love and respect. She wanted you to know that she's trying to understand your perspective, even though she's still hurt and angry." The message had been carefully worded, acknowledging our conflict while leaving room for eventual reconciliation. Amanda was letting me know that she wasn't ready to resume our relationship, but she also wasn't closing the door permanently. The fact that she'd specifically mentioned love and respect suggested she was processing our confrontation and perhaps recognizing the genuine affection that had motivated my misguided actions. "Did she say anything else about her situation?" I'd asked, hungry for any information about how she was managing without my interference. Mark had hesitated before responding. "She mentioned that Carlos had received a job offer from Dr. Harrison, but they were still deciding whether to accept it. She seemed conflicted about something related to that opportunity." The news that Dr. Harrison had indeed reached out to Carlos directly, without my involvement, had been both gratifying and terrifying. It meant my withdrawal from manipulation was working as intended, allowing people to develop their own relationships and make their own decisions. But it also meant that Carlos and Amanda were facing a choice that could significantly impact their future, and I had no influence over the outcome. That evening, I'd sat in my study trying to imagine the conversations Amanda and Carlos were having about their options. Carlos would be weighing the benefits of returning to a position where he'd been happy and successful against the knowledge that the opportunity had originally been created through his mother-in-law's deception. Amanda would be considering whether accepting the job would represent a step toward reconciliation with me or a compromise of the independence she'd fought to establish. The complexity of their decision had illustrated perfectly why my interventions had been so destructive. By creating secret arrangements, I'd complicated straightforward relationships and opportunities, adding layers of emotional complexity that made it difficult for people to make clear choices based on their own values and preferences. A week later, Patricia had brought me news that Carlos had accepted Dr. Harrison's legitimate offer, but at a salary significantly lower than what my subsidy had provided. The family would still face financial challenges, especially with the baby coming, but they'd chosen authentic struggle over comfortable deception. The decision had filled me with a mixture of pride and sadness. I was proud of Amanda and Carlos for choosing integrity over ease, for prioritizing their autonomy over their comfort. But I was also sad that my attempts to help had created a situation where they had to choose between financial stability and emotional authenticity. Around this time, I'd begun receiving indirect updates about Amanda's pregnancy through family, members who remained in contact with both of us. Aunt Stephanie had mentioned that Amanda was experiencing some complications that required additional monitoring, information that had sent waves of anxiety through me. Every maternal instinct I possessed had urged me to call Amanda immediately, to offer support and assistance, to be present during what might be a difficult time. But I'd learned enough about boundaries to recognize that my anxiety didn't constitute an emergency that justified violating Amanda's request for space. If she wanted my support during her pregnancy complications, she knew how to reach me. My role was to be available if needed while respecting her right to handle her medical care and emotional needs through the support system she'd chosen. The discipline required to maintain this hands-off approach had been perhaps the most difficult aspect of my entire rehabilitation process. Watching from a distance as Amanda navigated challenges that I was equipped to help with had tested every assumption I'd held about the obligations of motherhood and the expressions of love. During this period, I'd also begun working with a therapist who specialized in family dynamics and control issues. Dr. Torres, no relation to Carlos despite the shared surname, had helped me understand the psychological roots of my need to orchestrate other people's lives. Control often stems from anxiety, she'd explained during one of our sessions. When we feel powerless over outcomes that matter to us, we sometimes try to regain that power through manipulation and behind-the-scenes management. Her analysis had resonated deeply. My need to control Amanda's circumstances had indeed grown, from anxiety about her welfare, amplified by my own experiences of financial insecurity and abandonment. But recognizing the source of my behavior hadn't immediately changed it. Breaking lifelong patterns required constant vigilance and frequent failures. The therapeutic process had also helped me understand that my interventions had served my emotional needs as much as they'd supposedly served Amanda's practical ones. Knowing that I was secretly ensuring her success had made me feel useful and important, essential to her happiness in ways that she never realized. The discovery of my manipulations hadn't just threatened her independence, it had revealed that my sense of purpose as a mother had been built on maintaining her dependence, on assistance she didn't know she was receiving. As autumn arrived in Colorado, bringing the beautiful changing of leaves that usually marked one of my favorite times of year, I'd found myself facing the reality that Amanda's due date was approaching rapidly. My first grandchild would be born within the next few months, and I might not be present for that momentous occasion. The thought had been almost unbearable, but it had also been clarifying. The baby's arrival would represent a new generation, a fresh start for Amanda and Carlos as they became parents. Whether I would be part of that child's life would depend entirely on my ability to demonstrate that I'd learned to love without controlling, to support without manipulating, and to be a grandmother who respected boundaries rather than constantly testing them. The work of earning that privilege was far from complete, but the foundation had been laid through months of painful honesty and deliberate restraint. I'd learned to sit with uncertainty, to tolerate outcomes I couldn't influence, and to find meaning in relationships based on mutual respect rather than secret power dynamics. The leaves outside my office window were turning brilliant shades of gold and red, reminding me that change, even difficult change, could be beautiful. Whether that beauty would extend to my relationship with Amanda remained to be seen, but I was finally ready to let that outcome unfold naturally, rather than trying to orchestrate it from behind the scenes. The call came at 2 a.m, on a crisp November night, piercing through my sleep with the urgency that only phone calls at that hour can carry. I fumbled for my phone, my heart already racing with the premonition that this moment would change everything. "Linda?" It was Carlos's voice, strained with exhaustion and something that sounded like barely controlled panic. "Amanda's in labor. We're at Denver General and she's asking for you." The words hit me like electricity, instantly clearing away any remnants of sleep. After 4 months of silence, of respecting boundaries and learning to love from a distance, my daughter was calling for me in her moment of greatest need. "I'll be there in an hour," I said, already throwing off my covers and reaching for clothes. "Carlos, is she okay? Are there complications?" "The doctors say everything looks normal, but labor started suddenly and it's moving fast. Linda, she's scared, and she keeps saying she wants her mom." Those last words broke something open in my chest that had been carefully held together for months. Despite everything that had happened between us, despite the trust I'd broken and the boundaries I'd violated, Amanda still thought of me as her mother when fear stripped away everything else. The drive to Denver passed in a blur of mountain, highways, and urgent prayers to whatever forces might be listening that both Amanda and the baby would be safe. I'd made this drive countless times over the years for various reasons, but never with such a mixture of anticipation and terror coursing through my veins. Denver General's maternity ward was quiet at 3 a.m, the hallways dimly lit and filled with the hushed atmosphere of a place where life's most profound moments happened around the clock. A nurse directed me to room 314, where I paused outside the door, suddenly uncertain about what reception awaited me. Through the small window, I could see Amanda propped up in the hospital bed, her hair damp with perspiration and her face showing the strain of hours of labor. Carlos sat beside her, holding her hand and speaking to her in low, encouraging tones. The scene was so intimate, so precious, that I almost turned around and left, not wanting to intrude on this sacred space they'd created together. But then, Amanda looked up and saw me through the window, and her face crumpled with relief. "Mom!" she called out, her voice breaking on the word. I entered the room tentatively, as if approaching a wild animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. "I'm here, sweetheart. How are you doing?" "It hurts so much more than I expected," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "And I'm terrified something's going to go wrong. I keep thinking about all the things that could happen, all the ways I might not be ready for this." Without thinking, I moved to her other side and took her free hand, the one Carlos wasn't holding. "You're going to be an amazing mother, Amanda. You've been preparing for this your whole life, even when you didn't know it." "But what if I make the same mistakes you did?" she asked, the question hanging in the air between us like a challenge and a plea. "What if I love this baby so much that I end up controlling their life instead of letting them live it?" The honesty of her fear stopped me cold. Even in the midst of labor, Amanda was grappling with the lessons our estrangement had taught her about the dangers of love without boundaries. She was afraid of becoming me, afraid of repeating the patterns that had nearly destroyed our relationship. "Then you'll catch yourself and make corrections," I said firmly, "because you're already more aware of those dangers than I ever was. The fact that you're worried about it means you're unlikely to fall into the same traps." A contraction seized her then, and all conversation stopped as she breathed through the pain with the focus the nurses had taught her. Carlos and I worked, together instinctively, him coaching her breathing while I rubbed her back, both of us united in supporting her through this monumental physical challenge. When the contraction passed, Amanda looked at me with new clarity. "Mom, I need to tell you something. I've been angry with you for months, and I had every right to be. But I've also missed you terribly. There were so many moments during this pregnancy when I wanted to call you, wanted to share the excitement or ask for advice, but I was too proud and too hurt." "I missed you too," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "More than I can possibly express. And Amanda, I want you to know that I've spent these months learning how to be different, how to love you without trying to control your life." "I know," she said, surprising me. "Diane has been keeping me updated on some of the changes you've been making. She told me about how you restructured your business relationships and started working with a therapist. I also know that you could have intervened when Carlos was job hunting, but you didn't." The fact that she'd been monitoring my progress through Diane revealed that despite her anger, she'd been hoping for evidence that I could change. Her awareness of my restraint during Carlos's employment search suggested she understood how difficult it had been for me to step back and let them handle their own challenges. Another contraction interrupted our conversation, this one stronger and longer than the previous ones. The nurse who came to check Amanda's progress announced that it was time to move to the delivery room, that the baby was ready to make their entrance into the world. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of medical activity, coaching Amanda through the final stages of labor, and the indescribable anticipation that accompanies waiting for a new person to arrive. Carlos never left her side, proving himself to be exactly the supportive partner she deserved, while I tried to be helpful without being intrusive, offering comfort when asked, but stepping back when the moment belonged to the two of them. At 6:47 in the morning, as the Colorado sun was painting the hospital room with golden light, my granddaughter entered the world with a powerful cry that announced her presence to everyone within hearing distance. She was beautiful and perfect, with a shock of dark hair like her father's, and what appeared to be her mother's determined chin. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, though we'd already known that from the ultrasounds. But hearing it declared in that moment, seeing this tiny person who was part Amanda and part Carlos but entirely herself, made the reality hit with stunning force. Amanda was crying and laughing simultaneously, reaching for her daughter with trembling hands as the medical team completed their initial assessments. Carlos was openly weeping, his usual composed demeanor completely abandoned in the face of overwhelming joy and relief. "She's so beautiful," Amanda whispered, cradling the baby against her chest. "Look at her, Mom. Look at what we made." The shot. Way she included me in that moment, saying, "Look," as if my witnessing was important to her experience, told me that something fundamental had shifted between us. The birth of her daughter had created space for forgiveness and new beginnings, an opportunity to rebuild our relationship on healthier foundations. "What's her name?" I asked, realizing they'd kept this detail secret throughout the pregnancy. Amanda and Carlos exchanged a look that held entire conversations. Then Amanda turned back to me with a smile that was both shy and proud. "Sophia Linda Torres," she announced. "Sophia for Carlos's grandmother who passed away last year, and Linda for the grandmother who's going to spoil her terribly but in all the right ways." The inclusion of my name in their daughter's identity was a gift I hadn't dared hope for, a signal that despite everything that had happened between us, Amanda still wanted me to be part of this child's life. But it was also a responsibility, a trust that I would have to earn every day by being the kind of grandmother who supported rather than controlled, who respected boundaries rather than testing them. "Can I hold her?" I asked, not wanting to assume anything about my role or privileges. Amanda nodded, carefully transferring the tiny bundle into my arms. Sophia Linda Torres was warm and solid and perfect, her little face scrunched with the effort of adjusting to life outside the womb. As I held her, I felt something settle into place in my chest, a sense of purpose that was different from anything I'd experienced before. This was what love without control felt like. This was how to be needed without being manipulative, how to be important without being indispensable. Sophia would grow up knowing she was loved unconditionally, but she would also grow up knowing that love meant freedom to make her own choices, even when those choices worried the people who cared about her. "I have something I need to tell both of you," I said, settling into the chair beside Amanda's bed with Sophia still in my arms. "I want to establish a college fund for Sophia, but I want to do it transparently, with all the legal documentation and no surprises. You'll have complete oversight of how the money is managed and when it's accessed." Amanda studied my face carefully, looking for hidden agendas or secret conditions. "No strings attached? No expectations about what she studies or where she goes to school?" "No strings," I confirmed. "It's a gift from a grandmother who wants to contribute to her granddaughter's future opportunities. Nothing more complicated than that." Carlos spoke up for the first time since Sophia's birth. "Linda, I also want you to know that I've been thinking about what happened with my job at Summit Healthcare. I was angry and hurt when I found out about the financial arrangement, but I've come to understand that your intentions were good, even if your methods were problematic. His gracious acknowledgement of my motivations meant more than I could express. Carlos had every right to remain resentful about my interference in his career, but he was choosing to focus on the love that had inspired my actions rather than the deception that had enabled them. I'm grateful for your understanding, I replied. But I also want you to know that I respect the choice you made to leave that position and find employment on your own terms. It showed integrity and strength that I admire. Actually, Carlos continued with a small smile, Dr. Harrison has been so impressed with my work since I returned that he's offered me a partnership track in the practice. It would mean more responsibility and eventually partial ownership, but it's based entirely on my performance and potential, not on any external arrangements. The news filled me with pride and relief. Carlos was building the professional life he deserved through his own efforts, and Amanda could be confident that their family's success was authentically earned. My withdrawal from manipulation had created space for genuine achievements that no one could question or undermine. Amanda was watching our conversation with interest, and I could see her processing the implications of how we were talking to each other. There was respect and honesty in our exchange, but also warmth and genuine caring. This was what healthy family relationships looked like, with clear boundaries, but also open communication. Mom, Amanda said quietly, I want you to know that I've learned things about myself during these months we were apart. I realized that some of my anger toward you was actually fear about my own capabilities. When I discovered how much you'd been managing behind the scenes, it made me question whether I was actually as competent as I'd believed. Her admission revealed another layer of the damage my interventions had caused. Beyond the violation of her autonomy, my secret assistance had undermined her confidence in her own abilities, making her doubt achievements that were legitimately hers. But working through this pregnancy and preparing for motherhood without your hidden help has shown me that I am capable of handling challenges on my own, she continued. I can make good decisions, solve problems, and create the life I want for my family. Knowing that makes it easier to accept help when it's offered openly and honestly. Her words represented a complete understanding of why my methods had been so destructive and why boundaries were necessary for healthy relationships. She'd used our estrangement as an opportunity for growth and self-discovery, emerging stronger and more confident in her own capabilities. Sophia stirred in my arms, making tiny sounds that might have been hunger, or simply the vocalizations of someone adjusting to breathing air instead of amniotic fluid. Amanda reached for her, and I transferred the baby back to her mother's arms, watching as the nursing instinct kicked in and Sophia settled into feeding. There's something else I want to discuss, Amanda said as Sophia nursed contentedly. Carlos and I have talked about this, and we'd like you to be actively involved in Sophia's life, but with some agreements about how that involvement works. I leaned forward, eager to hear what conditions they'd developed for my participation in their family life. We want regular visits, babysitting when we need it, and all the normal grandmother activities, Amanda explained. But we also want you to respect our parenting decisions, even when you disagree with them. If you have concerns or suggestions, we want you to voice them directly to us, not try to address them through indirect actions. And if we ask for help, we want to know exactly what kind of help we're receiving, Carlos added. No secret arrangements, no hidden financial support, no behind-the-scenes problem-solving that we don't know about. Their conditions were reasonable and necessary, the boundaries that would allow us to rebuild trust while protecting the autonomy they'd fought to establish. I nodded my agreement readily, understanding that these guidelines would benefit everyone involved. I accept those terms completely, I said, and I want to add one more commitment from my side. If I find myself tempted to intervene in ways that violate these boundaries, I promise to call my therapist or Diane before taking any action. I've learned that my impulse to help sometimes overrides my better judgment, so I need external accountability. Amanda smiled, the first truly relaxed expression I'd seen from her since entering the hospital room. That sounds like a good safety net for all of us. As the morning progressed, family members began arriving to meet Sophia and celebrate her safe arrival. Aunt Stephanie was first, bringing flowers and tears of joy at seeing Amanda and me together again. Diane arrived with coffee and bagels for everyone, her relief at our reconciliation evident in every gesture. Even Dr. Harrison stopped by during his hospital rounds, congratulating Carlos on becoming a father and mentioning how proud he was to have him as a colleague. Each visitor added to the atmosphere of celebration and new beginnings, but it was the quiet moments between the social interactions that meant the most to me. Watching Amanda and Carlos navigate their first hours as parents, seeing their natural instincts for caring for Sophia, observing how they supported each other through the overwhelming experience of becoming a family. Late in the afternoon, as Amanda dozed and Carlos stepped out to make phone calls to his family in Texas, I found myself alone with Sophia for the first time. She was sleeping peacefully in the bassinet beside her mother's bed, her tiny chest rising and falling with the rhythm of new life. "Hello, Sophia Linda," I whispered to her. "I'm your grandmother, and I have so much to learn about how to love you properly. But I promise you this. I will never make the mistakes with you that I made with your mother. You will grow up knowing that you are loved exactly as you are, not as someone I think you should become." The promise felt sacred, a commitment not just to Sophia but to the kind of grandmother I intended to be. She would know she could count on my support without fearing my interference, could trust my love without worrying about hidden agendas, could develop her own relationship with me that wasn't complicated by the history Amanda and I had worked through. When Amanda woke from her nap, she found me sitting quietly beside Sophia's bassinet, not holding or disturbing her, but simply being present. "You look different, Mom," she observed, "more peaceful somehow." "I feel different," I admitted. "Like, I've been carrying a weight I didn't realize was there, and it's finally been lifted. These months of learning to step back, of letting you and Carlos handle your own lives, have taught me things about myself I never understood before. Such as the fact that my need to control outcomes was really about my own anxiety, not about what was best for you. And that real love means trusting people to make their own mistakes and learn their own lessons, even when it's terrifying to watch." Amanda nodded thoughtfully. "I think becoming a mother is going to teach me similar lessons. Already I can feel how much I want to protect Sophia from everything difficult or painful, but I know that's not possible, or even desirable." "The hardest part of parenting," I said, "is learning when to hold on and when to let go. I held on too long and too tightly with you, but I'm going to try to do better as Sophia's grandmother." As evening approached and visiting hours drew to a close, I prepared to leave Amanda and Carlos to their first night as a family of 3. The hospital room was filled with flowers and balloons, evidence of how many people loved them and were celebrating Sophia's arrival. "Mom," Amanda called as I gathered my things to leave. "Thank you for coming when I called. I know it took courage to walk back into my life after everything that happened." "Thank you for calling," I replied, "and for giving me the chance to be part of Sophia's life from the very beginning." "Just remember our agreements," she said with a smile that took any sting out of the reminder. "Always," I promised. The drive home through the Colorado mountains was completely different from the frantic trip I'd made earlier that morning. This time I was traveling with a heart full of hope and gratitude, carrying the memory of holding my granddaughter and the knowledge that my relationship with Amanda had survived our crisis and emerged stronger. Sophia Linda Torres had brought more than new life into our family. She'd brought the possibility of new patterns, healthier dynamics, and love that's supported rather than controlled. As I watched the sunset paint the mountains in brilliant colors, I felt grateful for the hard lessons that had led to this moment of grace and redemption. The future stretched ahead full of first steps and first words, birthday parties and bedtime stories, all the precious moments of watching Sophia grow into whoever she was meant to become. And this time, I would be present for those moments, not as the orchestrator trying to control outcomes, but as the grandmother learning to love with open hands and an open heart. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.